Good evening and welcome to Chasing the Facts. I'm Sam Chase, your host, and with us this evening is Virginia Crocker-Timmins, who is on the Board of Selectmen. As a matter of fact, she has just been elected by her colleagues as chair of the board. And I did it again. I said Board of Selectmen. And maybe if I live long enough, I'm going to fix that. And I just want to assure you.
No worries, and thank you for having me.
I'll tell you, right out of the gate, I blow it.
I still say it sometimes.
I've noticed that. I watch your meetings and I say, well, you know what, they say it. So it's awfully tough to change any habit, good or bad, that's once it's been absolutely ingrained into your consciousness. Mm-hmm. So, but we do try, and I try, and I agree with that change. I mean, it's long overdue. It should have been select board a long time ago. So, but anyway, as I said, we have Virginia with us this evening, and hopefully she'll give us some insight and into what may be ahead of us in terms of administrative activity for the town in the coming fiscal year. And before we start, I do want to say, for the information of our audience, you'll notice that neither Virginia nor I are wearing masks. We do follow the CDC COVID-19 protocols in this studio. There are only 3 of us in the studio, Virginia, myself, and Vilu Tari, who manages the filming from the production booth. We have no people on the floor, no camera people. We are socially distanced at about 8.5 feet at the table, and both Virginia and I have been fully vaccinated. Mm-hmm. So we think that this is we think that sufficient precautions have been taken so that we can be without masks. So I just want to get that out of the way. So again, Virginia, thank you for agreeing to be on the show. And what we usually do is we start off with the guest just giving a very, very brief biographical sketch. So if you will do that for us, we'd appreciate it.
Sure. I've been in Chelmsford about 24 years, and my education is in engineering. I had a 28-year career in the defense industry, and I did a few years in engineering. Most of my time was in new business development and strategic initiatives, and also a few years in profit and loss running programs. And I made a lifestyle choice a few years ago and started my own practice in business and executive coaching and got fully trained and certified. When I was in my corporate career, I spent about 10 years in middle management and about 12 years in executive positions. So as I started thinking again about public service, I felt that I probably had some transferable skills that I could use to give back to my community mm-hmm. through a term in public service, and so.
Well, that's a great background, and of course, there are many people, and I guess I'm one, if I stop and think about it, mm-hmm. who believe that people who come from the private sector into public service bring something with them that is very valuable, as opposed to those folks who take their formal education with a career path of public service, and then that's all they ever do. Not to put those folks down, but I think if you can get a mix of people, and you can get people like you, and I'll include myself in that mix as well, people who've had significant private sector and management type experience, I think that does help. That brings a nice perspective to the mix.
I think any blend and diversity of mm-hmm. people that come to the board combined with the town manager is good for the town.
Absolutely.
We all bring different backgrounds and different experience to the table, and when you can take that in the aggregate, I think the outcomes can only get better. So.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. Well, you've given us just a little bit of a clue in what you just said about your public service and what was motivating you, but was there anything specifically that motivated you to run, 3 years ago now, right?
Yeah, so I had thought about public service on and off, both in Chelmsford and other places that I had lived, and my career at the time just didn't afford me the time, I was traveling extensively and mm-hmm. long work hours. And then, as I said, I changed careers, and I had spent a year on the Route 40 Study Committee, getting to know a little bit more about Chelmsford's municipal government and how that works, and that sparked my interest in public service again. So that was what really, the combination of that and not having the demands of my corporate career anymore is what spawned me to run. Because again, it was a long-term interest. It was re-sparked during the Route 40 Study Committee, and I had the time to be I was more flexible with my time to be able to do it, because
So,
it's a big commitment.
Yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely it is. So you were basically at a point in your career and your domestic life and so forth that you felt that you could spare the time and give the effort. Yeah. And I know for some folks it's tough. People are younger and they seek these board positions, and maybe they have a family with small children, and they don't sometimes realize, what the time commitment is to some of these board assignments. I think school committee and select board are probably the toughest in terms of time commitment, if you do the job the way it should be done. Yeah. So.
And I think with both of those boards, they seem to be part-time volunteer jobs with a full-time commitment.
That's very well
that's
said.
Really,
I like
that's
that.
really how it feels.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that's right. So you've been on the board for about 3 years now. Is there anything in that time that has really surprised you didn't see coming, or has it been pretty much as you've expected?
I honestly didn't come into it with any real set expectations, and I wasn't somebody who, watched every single board meeting before I ran.
Yeah, because you probably wouldn't have run had you done that.
But I think it's like anything else. You can't predict everything that's going to come up. I mean, there's just the dynamics of the town, and there's certain things within our control and certain things that come up that we have to address and deal with. Nobody could have predicted the PFAS issues, for example, that we're dealing
exactly.
with. So, I think one of the things that I've tried to do a little bit more, if there was one thing that sort of surprised me, was I kind of felt like we didn't discuss things as much as I would have expected when I first came to the board, and I don't know if that was just me getting assimilated, but I really feel that discussion is important. So if I don't feel like I'm hearing from everybody, I'll often tend to just ask, well, what do you think, before we actually do make a decision and a path forward.
You're talking about at the meeting among the
yeah,
board members.
Yeah, at our public meetings, yeah. So that was one thing that just felt different to me, coming in from the background that I had, because you come to the conference room table and you're there to really have an in-depth discussion, and it's a little bit different when you're sitting in that public meeting forum, just to try to drive the discussion and put it on the table. So.
Well, I think,
I don't know if I'm making sense. Or
Oh, no, it makes perfect sense to me, because I've been through it, and I know when I was on the board many years ago, I used to get very frustrated because we'd have a topic come up and we'd discuss it. And as you said, a lot of things are sort of cut and dry. I mean, the town manager has the responsibility, and he does whatever it is, and then brings it before the board, and we're supposed to approve it or comment or whatever. And we'd have, the best example I can give you is my first year on the board with the split tax rate, which I think is a very important issue. The selectmen, that's a very important thing for the select board to do. And, the assessor got up, and of course back then didn't do anywhere near the type of presentation that's done now. It was just very cursory, and 2 minutes, and okay, let's take the vote. I'm a brand new, I said, wait a minute, aren't we going to talk about this? I mean, I actually said that at the meeting. Come on, fellas, let's talk. And they all looked at me like, no, you're not supposed to do that. Well, I said, okay, I'll start. And then, and after the meeting, and then they did. Of course, they chimed in. And after the meeting, I was told, that probably wasn't an appropriate thing for you to do. And I said, well, you better get used to it, because I don't think it's good for us to sit here on a major issue like this not have a discussion. And I said, the last thing I want is for townspeople to think, you know, that this is all just a rubber stamp exercise. Because this is one thing where the select board actually makes the decision. The town manager has nothing to do with it, you know. So I absolutely know where you're coming from.
I actually had a couple people say to me that, you know, there's a school of thought that says when you come in your first year, you sit quiet for the first few months and observe, and I just, that's just not me.
No.
And I don't think it benefits anybody to sit quiet.
Even if you ask questions.
Right.
Yeah. No. Absolutely.
And if they're if they're not on track, fine. I'll change course. But.
Well, I think you seem to have gotten into it pretty well and have, you know, assessed the lay of the land, so to speak. As you alluded to just a minute ago, there are many issues, and they do change from year to year. So at this point, what would you care to take a shot at identifying what you think the most critical issues that will be facing the town for the next year or so would be?
Sure. I think, you know, right now in the immediate month or two, we're doing some pretty heavy lifting trying to get through all the town meeting warrant articles, because there's some that are very substantive. We also have the town manager's contract, which expires at the end of June, and we're going to start discussing that process in May, so that we allow adequate time to be informed and have every board member feel that they're making decisions in the best interest of the town. Beyond that, I can tell you what my thoughts are about priorities. What I'd really like
that's
to,
what I want you to do.
What I'd really like to do is have like
Yes.
a board work session and get the whole board together. But I think there's a number of things. There's a lot of dynamics coming out of and through the pandemic. And things that are being driven by the state, things that may be more in our control. So I think we're going to have to be flexible and adaptable to help the town as we emerge from the pandemic. I mentioned the PFAS issues, especially with the North Chelmsford Water Department, because we have town property that's near one of their aquifers, and we have the test wells on that property. So we've done some considerable investment of time and dollars in the evaluation and diagnostic stage to try to understand if the source is on that property or not. And I think depending on the outcome of that, you know, that may be something that's likely going to be something that continues through the next year.
Now, if I can just interrupt you for a second on that point. Now, my understanding is, and I don't mean to minimize the situation in North Chelmsford, but my understanding is that that problem also exists to greater or lesser degrees elsewhere, right?
I believe so.
Okay.
So I know that the Chelmsford Water District has indicated that they're seeing elevated levels in one of their wells. I think that's been on their website. I don't know about the East Chelmsford Water District. And the water districts, as you know, are independent, separate entities from the town's municipal government. So kind of the reason why I went to the North Chelmsford Water District is because our town property, the DPW site on Richardson Road, is part of that equation right now until we determine where the source is. But I think all of the water departments in working with the town to make sure you know, our water is safe for the water takers is going to definitely be a high priority. Anything that we can do to work together on that. I think the sewer and what we do about the infrastructure with our lack of sewer capacity, what our options are, that's definitely going to go into the next year. Some of that could be a multi-year process. We're hearing even from Lowell that they may not be able to resolve their own capacity issues in a short-term timeline. So we have Weston and Sampson doing some work for us, and I expect to be getting some interim reports. I don't think their work is scheduled to be finished until later this year.
Do you see that situation affecting development at all as it continues to roll out in Chelmsford?
Well, I do. There are some constraints, you know, with residential development. You'd have to go to a septic system for new residential, single-home residential development. Some of the larger developments, multifamily, or even if, depending on what might need to be done for a commercial property, you'd be looking at on-site treatment plants, because right now we don't have the capacity to take more from Lowell. So I definitely think there's a trade space there that's going to have to be considered as new projects come forward.
That could actually be a factor that might mitigate some of the larger scale developments. If a developer, I mean, you've got land acquisition costs and other preparation. If a developer has to sink whatever it is, I don't know what the number is, but I think we can probably guess it's a high number into an on-site treatment plant. That might be a disincentive to develop the property, I would think. So
right, and I mean one good example of that would be the the former UMass West campus. So there was a developer that was interested in the last year in working with that property, and my understanding is between the on-site sewage treatment and meeting like affordable housing within their own allocated units, they couldn't make the numbers work.
Oh.
So now we have another developer looking at the same site, and there'll be a joint meeting at some point in the next month with the planning board and the select board. But it's absolutely going to come into play.
Oh yes, I would think so.
Yeah.
Anything else in terms of priorities, or?
Well, I think that one of the things that the select board put in place last year was the diversity and inclusion committee, and that was something that was also identified when we set up our vision and values of being a diverse and welcoming community. And I think that we're going to need to figure out where we want to take that in the coming year, because their term ends at the end of June. It was
only a one-year appointment?
It was a one-year appointment.
Okay.
So we're going to need to look at what we want to do in that area. And I think one of the other things that we've been challenged with during the pandemic is the community engagement and some of the community events and things that we've had. And I think a lot of people are looking to how can we start to restart and re-energize that. It was something that we had on our objectives in the last year, but it just wasn't feasible with the pandemic constraints. And my only other thought would be in terms of our state representation or whatever comes out with the census and what we need to deal with there, where we have four representatives right now at the state level. And I know some folks would like to see that called down to one or two to see if we can get more help for Chelmsford in terms of state aid and other things.
So, and again, that will be dependent on the census.
Virginia and Sam talking.
No, that's okay. No, I mean, these are all, and some of these, well, except for perhaps some of the infrastructure things we've talked about, a lot of these things are ongoing. The state rep thing has been a thorn in everybody's side for 20 years.
Yeah.
Because it never should have happened, and it was just political nonsense when it did happen. But you're stuck with it, and I think you're right. If we could get it to 2 reps anyway, I think that might help us quite a bit.
And the question is, does the census give us the opportunity to look at that again?
Right. Yeah, it's kind of
influence it.
It's always bothered me. Chelmsford is the 18th largest municipality in the state, and we are divided into 4 state representative districts.
Right.
I mean, it's absurd, you know. The old district, for the benefit of the viewers, used to be Chelmsford and Carlisle, which made sense, you know. It's sort of, I mean, Carlisle, I suppose, could be tacked on to Concord or Chelmsford, either one. And it just got carved up 20 years ago, and the reps are all pretty good. They're nice people, and I've always had a good relationship with them, but it's just reality. If 80% of your constituency comes from one area and 20% comes from the other, well, guess where the emphasis is going to be?
Exactly, and it's not at all a comment on the individuals or their intent or anything, but it's again, it goes to what you said. If you don't need the constituents in a community in order to stay in office, it creates a different level of motivation. And I think it also is harder from our end if there's something that we want to try to effect a change for the community of Chelmsford. Now we've got to get 4 people aligned, or hope that one can carry the flag for all of us, right? And so there's inefficiencies in
It's
it.
a tough,
and
it's a tough dynamic.
Yeah, it really is.
The only time it benefits us, and this has happened maybe twice in my memory in the last 12 or 15 years, the only
Yeah.
time it benefits us is when the legislative issue is a strictly Chelmsford issue. Then you got 4 reps. But again, that happens so seldom, it really isn't worth talking about. And in all the other cases, you have to pit parts of Lowell against Chelmsford and Littleton and Westford against Chelmsford, and it just doesn't work. So, you know, anything that you can do to, and really about all you can do, I think, as a select board, is to lobby and lobby hard.
Yeah.
But that is effective. I mean, you know, they will listen. So I think that is a high priority. So we'll see what the census has to say.
And I think the other priority is to continue to support the ongoing efforts with Lisa Maroney and company in terms of growing our commercial industrial property base. There's been some real great progress there, and
that situation has worked out a lot better than I was a little skeptical at first, but I think she's done and as you know, I'm on the Economic Development Commission, so I have a little bit more visibility to it. She's done a fantastic job.
Right.
Really,
Yeah.
she's a real aggressive person in terms of, you know, the programs that she tries to support
And I think it's a really nice compliment to what Evan does.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's also I think in hindsight, it's probably helped free up his time.
Without a doubt.
To do more and to, you know, bring more grant money in and
Yep.
things like that.
Yep.
So I think overall it's been a really good thing for the community.
Well, that's good. Can we talk a little bit more about the vision and values? Because that's something that intrigued me when it came up, and you're probably too modest, so I'm going to do it for you. As I recall, this was your initiative, okay? And I remember it, and it was, I don't know, a year or so in when you were on the board. I'm trying to remember the time frame, but I can remember going to a sort of a work session at the senior center. I think you had a number of those, and I remember. I think I might have attended the first one where you rolled it out, and I thought to myself at the time, when you were talking about it at the meeting, and I knew other towns had done this, but of course, coming from industry, this is something that most medium and large-scale corporations have had for years, forever, okay? And I always thought, you know, it would be appropriate for the town, so I was kind of glad to see when you made that initiative. So I'll let you talk more about it now.
Sure.
Since
It was something that I brought up actually during the campaign. And my first year on the board, I proposed putting the establishment of a vision and values statement into our objectives for that year. And I think some people thought it was a really good idea. Other people just weren't sure what it meant or where I was coming from. But I was aware that other municipalities have done this, and like you said, I'm very familiar with it from my corporate background. But the idea is that the vision statement is something that defines where you might want to be for the next 5 to 15 years. It's a longer term view. And when you can clearly articulate that, it gives the community something to coalesce around. The value statements tend to drive behavior and also priorities. So it represents, who we are, how do we want to collectively, the vision and values, who we are, how do we want to be seen by the community that we serve, by our suppliers, our vendors, the other communities that look at us. And so the idea was to really put something in place, again, that the community could coalesce around, that we could look at keeping kind of in our frontal lobes from an awareness standpoint that might help drive us to focus us on the end state of where we really want Chelmsford to be and the behaviors and things that we value in the long term. And that was really the thought process when we started it. This year we've been working on the implementation recommendations from the committee. And those are...
The diversity committee?
No, from the Vision and Values Committee.
The Vision and Values, I'm sorry,
yeah,
okay.
So those are pretty much all in place, with one exception we're working on. We just put into policy to ask boards and committees and town employees to just sign an acknowledgement that we've read it and we understand it. And again, that's just from an awareness standpoint. it's not necessarily meant to be, something that we're going to go police or anything like that, but it's...
I remember you
it's-
had a discussion about that at one of your meetings,
well,
yeah.
There was a question about how
Right.
do you enforce it, and I don't know that,
Well.
you can. I mean, clearly if there's
Yeah.
some gross...
If it needs enforcement, it will be obvious.
It's going to be bigger than this,
Right,
probably.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and again, I think, even as different boards and committees are thinking
Mm-hmm.
about goals and priorities, this might also just help provide
Right.
a high-level framework.
And while you've been talking, the audience has had the benefit of being able to read the statement
okay.
up on the screen. What strikes me about this, I mean, I think it hits all the spots that you want it to hit, but one of the things I like about it is it's short. I mean, I've seen these things go on for paragraphs and paragraphs, and it's like the sermon in church, if the priest doesn't get it out in 3 minutes, he's lost the congregation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this I think is it's very succinct, but it seems to get across what you've been talking about, and then you list the values that are being supported underneath, and it's pretty clear. So, and some of this will dovetail, I would think, with some of the work that the diversity committee is doing as well. I would imagine that that they are related in some way, if you're looking to have that kind of input going forward.
Yeah, so, I mean, the shortness, that was by design. The committee really just, we looked at samples from other towns, and then we put them aside and said, we're never going to look at them again. We want to start from a clean sheet of paper. So, and we wanted something that was short, concise, and wasn't a burden to read or buy into. From the diversity standpoint, I absolutely think that, that may be some type of future focus. When we put the Diversity, Racial Equity, and Inclusion Committee in place last year, it was after the George Floyd incidents and some of the, horrific things that happened in this country. And following that, we had a listening session with the community and decided that that would be a next logical step to help raise awareness and education. And so we assigned this committee and said, we don't know what we don't know, figure out what you think is most important to do in the next 12 months. And they've done a great job with, Black History Month and some other things, the proclamation. They also have a anti-discrimination and hatred pledge. But then that bigger view of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what does that look like for Chelmsford going forward? I think you're spot on that's all related.
No, I think it is.
Yeah.
So we've got about 1 minute and 30 seconds to go.
Okay.
So is there anything you would like to say to wrap up the session?
Just that, it's really an honor for me to be chosen as the chair this year, and I think if the community has any input in terms of where you think our priorities should be this year, please feel free to contact any of the board members, come to our public input segment and let us know.
Do you envision having a more formal public input session in the future? I know in the old days we used to do those periodically, apart from the regular meetings.
I hadn't really thought about it, but
Yeah.
maybe we will do that.
Yeah.
You know,
It's a good
as
idea.
input into our work session
Yep.
for goals is what you're talking about?
Just in general,
In
I
general?
think twice a year we used to say, okay, let's just go to the senior center and we'll open it up, and
That's a great
anybody who wants to
idea.
come in and yell at us has the ability to do it.
We've
And they did.
We've done them on since I've been on the board,
Yeah.
we've done them on very specific topics
Right,
like
right.
traffic and,
Right.
and
That's
racial
true.
equity. But I think that's a great idea, Sam.
Good.
I'll bring it up.
Well, again, Virginia, I want to thank you very much for coming on the show, and perhaps we'll have you back at another time. And as we said, half hour goes quickly, so there's probably an awful lot of things that we could talk about in addition to what we did talk about. So thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Okay. Good. That's a wrap. See how
hope
fast
that
that
was okay.
goes? Oh, it was perfect. It was perfect.